Face away from me. Put your hands behind your back.
Get on the ground now. Drop whatever's in your hands. The command tore through the air like a siren, sharp enough to make birds scatter from the trees. But this wasn't a traffic stop. There were no flashing lights, no crowded sidewalk, no storefront witnesses. This was a backyard private property behind a locked gate in one of Atlanta's quietest suburbs. And the weapon in the man's hands wasn't a gun. It was a pair of stainless steel barbecue tongs. Marcus Thorne stood beside his Weber grill. The lid cracked open, smoke drifting up in lazy curls. 3 ribeye steaks hissed on the grates, fat popping like tiny fireworks. He wore a navy polo tucked into khaki shorts, deck shoes planted firmly on stone pavers. The scene looked like every American Saturday afternoon you could imagine until the sound of boots on grass turned it into something else. Marcus turned his head slowly. A uniformed officer had just stepped through the side gate into the yard. Not the front door, not the driveway, not even the patio entrance. The side gate latched, clearly meant to keep strangers out, and posted right beside it. Bold and unmistakable. No trespassing. Private property. The officer didn't knock, didn't call out from outside the fence, didn't ask permission. He just came in, hand resting near his holster. Eyes locked on Marcus like he'd stumbled onto a fugitive hideout instead of a barbecue. Marcus didn't raise his hands. He didn't drop to his knees. He didn't panic. He simply lifted his chin, calm as a man who's been tested in real danger, and spoke like a man who knew exactly where the law drew the line. "Officer," Marcus said, voice deep and steady. "This is my backyard. If you cross that locked gate, you are trespassing." The officer's jaw tightened. He didn't like the tone, didn't like the confidence, didn't like that he'd been corrected before he could even establish control. "We're in hot pursuit," the officer snapped. "You fit the description." Hot pursuit. 2 words that gave police a narrow, specific exception in the eyes of the law, and 2 words that would later collapse under a single, simple detail. Marcus glanced at the officer top to bottom, then looked past him toward the open gate. "You're in hot pursuit?" Marcus asked. "Then, who were you chasing?" The officer took another step forward. "Don't play games with me. Get on the ground. Now." Marcus didn't move. The steaks sizzled behind him, almost mocking the tension. The air smelled like smoke and seasoning and fresh-cut grass, peaceful smells that suddenly felt out of place. Marcus lowered the tongs slowly, placing them on the grill's side tray with controlled precision, like he was showing the officer and any watching cameras that he wasn't a threat. Then he spread his hands slightly away from his body, palms open. "My hands are empty," he said, "and I'm going to tell you one time calmly because this matters." Marcus stepped half a pace back, not in fear, but to keep distance. "This is my home. The area you're standing in is legally protected just like the inside of my house. And you do not have consent. You do not have a warrant. And you have not stated an emergency that allows you to be here." The officer's eyes narrowed, almost offended by the word warrant, like Marcus had just insulted him. "Last warning," the officer hissed. "On the ground or you're going to jail." Marcus stared at him, unblinking. And in that moment, before anyone knew a Bodycam was recording, before neighbors started lifting phones over fences, before a city attorney would sit sweating in a conference room, Marcus said the sentence that turned this entire encounter into a ticking time bomb. "You are making a decision right now," he said quietly. "That's going to cost this city a lot of money." And the officer, instead of backing up, took one more step forward. Marcus Thorne didn't look like a man who was about to be arrested. He stood tall, 6 feet 2 inches, with the posture of someone who had spent decades being evaluated by other men in uniform. His shoulders were squared. His breathing slow and controlled. Not the stiffness of fear, but the stillness of discipline. Marcus was 58 years old, a retired United States Marine Corps colonel, 30 years of service, multiple deployments, a career spent enforcing rules so strict that lives depended on them. And now, after all of that, he was standing in his own backyard being treated like an intruder. The officer in front of him didn't know any of that. Or maybe he didn't care. To Officer Kyle Bring, 29 years old. 3 years on the force, Marcus was just another black man who didn't respond to shouting the way he expected. Bring had a reputation back at the precinct for being proactive. It was the kind of compliment supervisors used when an officer generated a lot of stops, a lot of reports, and a lot of complaints that never quite stuck. Bring had been trained to project command presence, to dominate the space, to expect immediate compliance. What he wasn't trained for was resistance wrapped in calm. "This is an active police investigation," Bring said, his voice hardening. "You don't get to lecture me on the law." Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying the officer like a senior officer assessing a junior one who'd just made a dangerous mistake. "I'm not lecturing you," Marcus replied. "I'm informing you." He gestured not aggressively, just enough to indicate the space around them. "This area is called curtilage," Marcus continued. "It's the area immediately surrounding a home. The Supreme Court has ruled it's afforded the same Fourth Amendment protections as the interior of the house itself." Bring scoffed. "You think using big words is going to change how this ends?" Marcus didn't react to the disrespect. He had heard worse from lieutenants half this officer's age. The gate was locked. Marcus said, "There's a posted no trespassing sign. You did not knock on my front door. You entered through a side gate with your hand on your weapon. That's not an investigation, that's an unlawful entry." Bring's jaw clenched. In his mind, this encounter was slipping away from him. It was supposed to be simple. A quick sweep. A show of authority. Maybe a compliance check. Instead, the homeowner was standing there, correcting him in clear, precise language, without raising his voice or showing an ounce of fear. That kind of calm, unnerved, Bring more than shouting ever could. "I told you." Bring snapped, stepping closer, his boots pressing into the neatly trimmed grass. "We're in hot pursuit. I don't need a warrant." Marcus didn't step back. Hot pursuit requires a continuous chase of a specific suspect. He said evenly, "If you were in hot pursuit, you would be running. You would be out of breath. You wouldn't be standing in my yard threatening me while I'm cooking dinner." The words landed harder than any insult. Bring's face flushed red. To him, this wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a challenge to his authority, his training, his identity as a cop. And the fact that the challenge was coming from a calm, older black man in his own backyard only made it worse. "You need to stop talking," Bring barked. "Right now." Marcus folded his hands loosely in front of him, fingers interlaced, still well away from the officer. "No," he said. "What you need to do is turn around, walk back through that gate, and leave my property immediately." For a brief moment, a fraction of a second, Bring hesitated. If he had listened then, if he had taken one step back, none of what followed would have happened. But instead of de-escalating, instead of recognizing that he might be wrong, Officer Kyle Bring chose to push forward. And in doing so, he crossed a line that the law does not forgive. The pause didn't last long. Officer Bring mistook Marcus's calm for defiance and defiance. In his mind, demanded escalation. "I don't need your permission," Bring said sharply. "I'm clearing the area." Clearing the area. Another phrase officers were trained to use, vague enough to sound official. Dangerous enough to bulldoze rights if left unchallenged. Marcus exhaled slowly through his nose, not in frustration, but in control. "Officer," he said. "Officer safety does not override the Constitution." Bring's eyes narrowed. His hand hovered closer to his taser now. Not because Marcus had moved, but because Bring felt his grip on the situation slipping. "You're interfering with a police investigation," Bring warned. "That's obstruction." Marcus shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "Obstruction requires an affirmative act. I'm standing still, on my own property. Verbally asserting my rights is not a crime." That statement clear. Confident. Legally correct landed like a slap. Bring took another step forward, closing the distance to less than 10 feet. The space between them felt charged. Heavy. Like the air before a storm. "What description do you match?" Marcus asked calmly. Bring hesitated, then snapped back. "Black male. Blue shirt." Marcus glanced down at himself, then back up. "I'm wearing a navy blue polo," he replied, "and I'm standing next to a grill." Did the report say the suspect stopped to cook ribeye steaks? For the first time, the absurdity of the situation cracked the surface. Bring had no answer. Because there was no suspect, no chase, no burglary unfolding behind the fence. There was only a hunch and the unspoken assumption that a black man in a backyard didn't automatically belong there. "You need to get on the ground." Bring barked again, louder this time, his voice cracking with strain. "This is your last warning." Marcus didn't move. Instead, he raised his voice just enough to carry beyond the fence. "I am not resisting." Marcus said clearly, "I am not obstructing. I am asserting my Fourth Amendment rights." The words weren't for Bring. They were for witnesses. And right on cue, the first one appeared. A head rose over the privacy fence to Marcus's left, then a hand, then a smartphone. "Officer," a woman's voice called out. "Why are you in Colonel Thorne's backyard?" Bring froze for half a second. The presence of a witness, especially one with a camera, changed the stakes. This wasn't just between him and Marcus anymore. This was becoming a record. "Ma'am." "Step back." Bring snapped. "This is an active police scene." "A police scene," the woman shot back. "He's barbecuing." Marcus didn't take his eyes off Bring. "You have a witness now," he said evenly. "You have no warrant. You have no consent. And you have no exigent circumstances." Bring's breathing quickened. His authority was eroding in real time, documented frame by frame. And instead of recognizing the danger of that, instead of pulling back, Officer Kyle Bring decided the only way to regain control was to force the issue. He reached down and unsnapped the retention strap on his holster. The soft click was unmistakable. And in that moment, what had started as an illegal entry became something far more dangerous. The click of the holster strap cut through the backyard like a warning bell. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Marcus noticed it instantly. So did the woman filming over the fence. So did the body camera mounted on Officer Bring's chest. Bring didn't draw his weapon, but the message was clear. Compliance was no longer being requested. It was being demanded. "You're obstructing an investigation," Bring said, his voice tight. "If you don't get on the ground right now, I will arrest you." Marcus turned his body fully toward him, slow and deliberate, making sure every movement was visible. He reached behind him and gently placed the barbecue tongs on the grill's side table. Metal clinked softly against steel. Then he spread his hands out to his sides. Palms open. Fingers relaxed. "My hands are empty," Marcus said, loud enough for the camera. "I am not resisting. I am not obstructing. I am asserting my constitutional rights." He paused, letting the words hang. "You are escalating this situation unnecessarily." Bring didn't respond to the logic. He responded to the challenge. He stepped off the stone walkway and onto the grass, boots sinking slightly into the manicured lawn, closing the gap between them. The distance shrank to arm's length. At that moment, the dynamic shifted. This was no longer about a supposed suspect. This was about control. Bring wasn't looking for evidence anymore. He was looking for submission. "I'm not playing games with you." Bring sneered. "We had a report of a suspect running through backyards. You fit the description." Marcus didn't raise his voice. "I live here," he said. "This is my house, and you have not articulated a lawful reason to be here." Another voice joined in now from the other side of the yard. A second neighbor had stepped out onto his back porch. Phone raised. "Officer." The man called out, "You're way out of bounds." Bring glanced toward the voice, irritation flashing across his face. Everyone stepped back. He barked, "This is an active police operation. It's a backyard barbecue." The neighbor shot back, "And you're trespassing." The word hit Bring hard. Trespassing. That accusation cut deeper than any legal argument, because it flipped the script. Suddenly, the man with the badge was the one standing somewhere he didn't belong. Marcus seized the moment, not emotionally, but precisely. "You are now on notice," he said calmly. "You have been informed that you are on private property without consent or warrant. Any further action you take will be a knowing violation of clearly established law." Bring's face flushed darker. He wasn't listening anymore. He lunged forward, not to arrest Marcus. Not yet, but to push past him. To prove something. His shoulder brushed Marcus's arm as he forced his way through. Tactical vest scraping against cotton fabric. It was brief, but it was physical. Marcus staggered half a step to keep his balance, then turned immediately toward the cameras. "Please note the time," Marcus said clearly. "It is coccinellatoista place." He looked directly at Bring's chest. "Officer," he continued, "what is your badge number?" Bring didn't answer. He was already walking away, boots crushing flower beds as he headed toward the corner of the yard, toward the shed, and with that single decision to ignore the warning, the witnesses, the law, Officer Kyle Bring crossed from misconduct into a civil rights violation that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Officer Bring didn't slow down. He didn't look back at Marcus. He didn't acknowledge the cameras. He didn't ask for consent. He walked straight toward the detached garden shed at the edge of the yard, boots stomping through the carefully tended rose bushes that Marcus's wife had spent years cultivating. "You will not go into that shed," Marcus called out, his voice firm, controlled. "I am explicitly denying you consent to search my property." Bring waved a dismissive hand without turning around. "I don't need your consent." He shot back. "I'm clearing the area for officer safety." "Officer safety." Marcus shook his head. "You cannot create the emergency and then use it to justify the intrusion," he said. "You entered my property. You escalated this. You are the aggressor." Bring stopped in front of the shed. It was a small, neatly kept structure with a simple wooden door and a latch. Nothing suspicious. Nothing hidden. Just lawn equipment, tools, and storage. For half a second, It looked like Bring might actually check the latch. He didn't. Instead, he lifted his boot and kicked near the handle. The crack of splintering wood echoed across the yard. The door burst inward, slamming against the shed wall. The neighbors gasped. Bring drew his taser, its red laser slicing through the dim interior as he shouted, "Police, come out now." There was no movement, no suspect, no fleeing burglar, just a riding lawnmower, bags of mulch, and a dusty set of golf clubs. Marcus felt a cold, focused anger settle in his chest. This wasn't about a shed door. This wasn't even about property damage. This was a man with a gun and a badge tearing through his life without a shred of legal authority and doing it in broad daylight. Bring stepped back out, irritation written all over his face. Empty. Nothing to justify what he'd done. And that made him more dangerous. Because when officers don't find what they're looking for, some of them start looking for someone to blame. Bring's eyes snapped toward the detached garage. A larger structure, 2-car, side door facing the yard. "And I'm going to check the garage," he announced. "You will not," Marcus said immediately. "I do not consent. That is a separate structure within the curtilage of my home." Bring turned, sweat now beading on his forehead, uniform darkening under the Georgia sun. "I can kick that door in too," he threatened. "And you will add felony destruction of property to your list of violations." Marcus replied, "That door costs more than your annual salary." That got a reaction. Bring stormed toward the garage anyway. This time, he didn't kick. He grabbed the handle and yanked. The door swung open. Inside, the garage was immaculate epoxy-coated floors. Tools mounted in perfect alignment along the walls. In the center sat a restored 1969 Chevrolet Camaro. Midnight blue. Gleaming like a museum piece. Bring rushed inside. Desperation creeping into his movements. He kicked over plastic storage bins. Looked under the car. Opened cabinets and slammed them shut. Still nothing. No stolen goods. No suspect. No excuse. From the fence line, a man's voice rang out firm. Authoritative. "Officer, you need to exit that garage immediately." The neighbor called. "That is a warrantless search of a curtilage structure." Bring spun around. Eyes wild now. He was cornered. 2 neighbors recording. A homeowner who knew the law. And nothing, absolutely nothing to show for it. He marched back out into the yard. Fists clenched. Chest heaving. The search had failed. And in his mind, that failure needed to be corrected. By force. By authority. By making sure anyone paid for the fact that he'd been wrong. Officer Bring marched back across the lawn, his boots cutting angry lines through the grass. The search had given him nothing, no suspect, no evidence, no justification. And now, with multiple phones pointed at him, the failure burned. He stopped inches from Marcus. "You're under arrest." Bring spat. The words landed flat. Marcus raised an eyebrow. Calm as stone. For what crime? Bring didn't answer right away. He reached for his cuffs first, buying time to invent one. "Obstruction of justice," he said finally, "and disorderly conduct." A murmur rippled from the fence line. "Asserting my rights is not obstruction," Marcus replied evenly. "And I have been the only orderly person here." Bring grabbed Marcus by the shoulder and spun him around. It was abrupt, unnecessary. The cameras caught everything. Marcus didn't resist. He didn't tense. He didn't pull away. He brought his hands together behind his back slowly, deliberately demonstrating compliance for every lens in the yard. I am not resisting. Marcus said clearly, I am not threatening you. You are arresting me because you didn't find the imaginary suspect you came looking for. The metal cuffs closed around his wrists with a sharp click. At that moment, the back door of the house opened. Dr. Elena Thorne stepped onto the patio. 55 years old. Pediatrician. Still in scrubs. A glass of iced tea in one hand. Her phone in the other. She took in the scene in a single scan, the broken shed door. The open garage. The neighbors filming and her husband in handcuffs. She didn't scream. She didn't drop the glass. She set it down carefully, raised her phone, and walked forward. Officer, she said, her voice cool and precise. I am Dr. Elena Thorne. I am recording this. You are arresting my husband, Colonel Marcus Thorne, on his own property. Bring avoided her eyes. He obstructed my investigation, he said, forcing the words out. Refusal to consent is not obstruction. Elena replied, You are making a mistake that will end your career. Bring tightened his grip on Marcus's arm and shoved him forward. Let's go. He snapped. Call the lawyer. Marcus said over his shoulder, his voice steady. Save all the footage. Do not let him back in the yard without a warrant. I've got it. Elena said, Don't say another word. They walked Marcus out through the gate, the same gate Bring had forced open minutes earlier. On the sidewalk, more neighbors had gathered now. Phones raised. Faces tight with disbelief. This was no longer a quiet suburb. It was a public reckoning. Marcus walked with his head high, hands cuffed behind him. Dignity intact. He nodded once to a man on a nearby porch, a retired attorney who gave a grim thumbs up. Legal help was already on the way. Bring, on the other hand, looked rattled. His movements were sharp, erratic. He gripped Marcus's arm tighter than necessary, eyes darting from phone to phone as he guided him to the patrol car parked crookedly in the street. He shoved Marcus against the cruiser. Spread your legs. Bring ordered, beginning a pat-down. I have a pocket knife in my right front pocket, Marcus said calmly. And my wallet in the back left. Bring pulled the wallet and flipped it open. The military ID was right there. Colonel, United States Marine Corps. Retired. For a split second, realization flickered across Bring's face. Then he shoved the wallet into his pocket like it didn't matter. Get in, he said, opening the back door. Marcus ducked into the hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut. Bring slid into the driver's seat and sat there, gripping the steering wheel, staring at his reflection in the rearview mirror. He picked up the radio. Dispatch. Nejlinkaleen Hoos. One in custody. Transporting to Central. Copy. The dispatcher replied. What are the charges? Bring hesitated just long enough to tell on himself. Obstruction. He said, resisting. Disorderly. The cruiser pulled away from the curb, and with every foot of distance between Marcus Thorne and his home, the cost of this arrest was rising fast. The drive to the precinct was suffocatingly quiet. No yelling, no pleading, no threats. Marcus Thorne sat upright in the back of the cruiser, hands cuffed behind him, eyes fixed forward. He didn't slump. He didn't lean back. He carried himself the same way he had carried himself in command rooms and briefing tents for decades. Officer Bring couldn't stand the silence. You shouldn't have interfered, he muttered. Eyes on the road. If you just let me check the shed, none of this would have happened. Marcus said nothing. People like you think you know the law. Bring continued, voice rising just enough to betray his nerves. But I'm just doing my job. Still nothing. Silence was Marcus's shield now. Every word would be twisted later. He knew the playbook. They pulled into the sally port at the precinct. The heavy garage door rattled shut behind them, sealing the moment. Bring yanked Marcus out of the car and marched him toward booking. At the desk sat Sergeant Andre Miller, 25 years on the force. Seasoned. Observant. He looked up, then froze. His eyes widened. Colonel Thorne. The room stopped breathing. Marcus met his gaze and nodded once. Good afternoon. Sergeant Miller. Miller stood slowly, eyes flicking to the handcuffs. Then to Officer Bring. Why is Colonel Thorne in cuffs? He asked. Bring straightened up. He obstructed my investigation. Refused to let me search his property. Sergeant Miller's jaw tightened. Sir. He asked Marcus directly. Did you physically resist this officer? No. Marcus said. I stood in my backyard. He entered through a locked gate without a warrant, searched my shed and garage against my will, and arrested me when I asked for his badge number. Miller turned to Bring. You went into his backyard without a warrant. I was in hot pursuit. Bring said, his voice cracking. Miller didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A pursuit of who? Bring hesitated. A suspect, a runner. Did you see that suspect enter the colonel's yard? Miller pressed. I thought he might have. Miller nodded once. Slowly. You thought. He looked back at the booking screen. Then back at Bring. Uncuff him. Now. But Sarge. I said uncuff him. The command echoed through the room. Bring's hands shook as he unlocked the cuffs. Marcus brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists where the metal had dug in. He didn't complain. I want the body camera. Miller said, extending his hand. Immediately. Bring unclipped it and placed it in Miller's palm. Miller didn't even look at it yet. Go to the break room. He ordered. Do not speak to anyone. Do not write a report. Wait for the watch commander. Bring nodded stiffly and walked away. Shoulders slumped. Miller turned back to Marcus. Sir, I am very sorry, he said quietly. Captain Miller is the watch commander today. He's already been notified. I know him, Marcus replied. We served on a Veterans Outreach Committee together. Of course you did, Miller thought. Moments later, Captain James Miller stepped into the booking area. He took one look at Marcus, then at Sergeant Miller's expression. Please tell me this is a misunderstanding, he said. Marcus didn't answer right away. Your officer entered my property without a warrant, Marcus said calmly. Damaged my shed, searched my garage, and arrested me for asserting my Fourth Amendment rights. Captain Miller closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. Bring up the footage, he said. We're watching it now. The Bodycam was docked. The screen lit up. And for Officer Kyle Bring, the truth was about to play on repeat. The video began without drama. A steady frame, a quiet street, then the side gate. On the screen, Captain Miller watched Officer Bring unlatch it and step through no hesitation. No announcement. The "No trespassing" sign filled the frame for a split second as the camera passed it. Captain Miller winced. The audio followed. Get on the ground now. The grill came into view. The smoke. The tongs. Marcus standing still. Composed. I'm on my own property. Marcus's voice said through the speakers. You crossed a locked gate. The captain leaned forward, elbows on the desk. Hot pursuit. Bring's recorded voice claimed. The video didn't lie. Bring wasn't running. He wasn't breathing hard. He was walking. Pause it. Captain Miller said. The frame froze on Bring's boots planted in the grass. He's not even winded. The captain muttered, "There is no pursuit." Sergeant Miller said nothing. He didn't need to. The video resumed. Marcus explaining curtilage, the calm refusal of consent, the officer stepping closer anyway. Then the holster strap click. Captain Miller's jaw tightened. "Jesus," he whispered. The moment of contact came next, Bring pushing past Marcus. The camera jolting as bodies brushed. The timestamp was clear. The neighbor's voice was clear. The phones were visible over the fence. Then the shed. The kick. The splintering wood echoed through the office speakers like a gunshot. Captain Miller flinched again. "That's destruction of property," he said flatly. "On private land." The garage search followed, bin lids clattering. Cabinets opening. Nothing found. No pause. No reconsideration. Then the arrest. "You're under arrest," Bring's voice said. "For what crime?" Marcus asked. Captain Miller hit pause again. This time longer. He swiveled his chair to face Marcus. "I don't have words," he said quietly. "This is indefensible." Marcus met his gaze. Steady and tired. "That's why I'm filing a federal civil rights lawsuit on Monday morning," he replied. "I'm telling you now, out of respect, but this officer is a danger to the public." Captain Miller nodded slowly. "If he did this to me," Marcus continued, "someone who knows the law and has witnesses, what is he doing to people who don't?" Silence filled the office. Captain Miller turned back to the screen and let the rest play. The handcuffs, the walk to the cruiser, the charges spoken into the radio. When the video ended, the room felt smaller. "Release him," the captain said immediately. "No charges." "Expunge the booking entry." "And the footage?" Marcus asked. "It's preserved." Sergeant Miller said, "Audit log." "Upload time." "Everything." "Good." Marcus replied, "I want a clean chain of custody." Captain Miller nodded again. "You'll have it." Marcus stood. "I want my property returned," he said, "and I want that officer off the street. He's done for the day." The captain replied, "Internal Affairs will open a file before sunset." Marcus didn't smile. He walked out of the office, collected his belongings, and signed the release form. Outside, an Uber waited. "No ride along home," Sergeant Miller offered gently. Marcus shook his head. "I think I've had enough of police cars for one day." As the Uber pulled away, the atmosphere inside the precinct turned radioactive. Captain Miller didn't go back to his desk. He went straight to the break room. Officer Bring was sitting alone, staring at a vending machine like it might explain what had just happened. "Sit down," the captain said quietly. Bring looked up. "I watched the footage." Captain Miller continued, "All of it." Bring swallowed. "In 22 years on this job," the captain said, leaning in, "I have never seen a clearer violation of the Fourth Amendment." Bring opened his mouth. "Stop," the captain said. "This is no longer a discussion." He placed his hand on the table. "You violated the Constitution. You violated department policy. And you arrested a man to cover your own mistake." Bring's face went pale. "Hand over your badge and your weapon." The captain said, "Administrative leave. Effective immediately." The badge came off with trembling fingers. And in that moment, the power officer Kyle Bring had carried into that backyard the power he thought was permanent, evaporated completely, while Marcus Thorne rode home in silence, staring out the window as familiar streets slid past. A very different kind of panic was spreading across City Hall. By sunset, the videos were already moving. First on neighborhood apps, then Facebook, then local news. By midnight, A clipped version of the body cam just enough to show the gate, the grill, and the kick to the shed door was circulating on national legal blogs. And by Monday morning, the city attorney's office was in full damage control mode. In a closed-door conference room, the mood was grim. The city manager sat at the head of the table, tie loosened, rubbing his temples. Beside him, the chief of police stared at the paused body cam footage, projected onto the wall. Officer Bring mid-stride, stepping past a no trespassing sign. Across from them sat Sarah Jenkins, the city's lead civil rights attorney. She didn't sugarcoat anything. "We can't fight this," Jenkins said flatly. "There is no defense." The chief shifted in his chair. He claimed hot pursuit. Jenkins clicked her remote. The video advanced a few seconds. Hot pursuit requires an active, continuous chase of a specific suspect, she said. This officer was walking. He wasn't chasing anyone. And even if he were, kicking a shed door and searching a garage without probable cause is indefensible. She paused the video again, this time on the moment Bring shoved past Marcus. That's physical contact. That opens the door to assault. The city manager swallowed. What happens if this goes to trial? Jenkins didn't hesitate. A jury will hate this, she said. They'll see a calm homeowner, a retired Marine, a fenced yard, and an officer who ignored the Constitution on camera. If this goes to verdict, we're not talking six figures. We're talking millions. Silence filled the room, and the officer, the chief, asked quietly, "He has to go." Jenkins replied, "Termination for cause. Gross misconduct. Violation of clearly established law. We need to make it clear the city doesn't stand behind this." The city manager nodded slowly. "Settle it. Quickly. Before this turns into a national referendum on our department." Across town, Marcus sat at his kitchen table with his wife, Elena, and their attorney, David Collins, a sharp-eyed civil rights litigator who had already watched the footage twice. "This is a textbook Fourth Amendment case," David said, tapping the tablet screen. "Unlawful entry, illegal search, false arrest, and we have multiple videos." "What's the number?" Elena asked. David looked at Marcus. "We could ask for 7 figures and justify every dollar." Marcus thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't want to bankrupt the city," he said. "I want accountability. I want policy changes. And I want the truth on the record." David nodded. "Then we aim high enough to hurt, but not enough to let them hide." The lawsuit was filed at 900 A.M. Sharp, Thorn v. City of Atlanta. No confidentiality clause, no quiet settlement. By noon, every major news outlet had the headline, and inside the city attorney's office, one thing was painfully clear. This was no longer about one officer's mistake. It was about whether the city could survive what the cameras had already shown. The negotiations moved fast. Too fast for comfort. That's how everyone at City Hall knew this case was dangerous. 3 weeks. That was all it took for the city's legal team to go from quiet confidence to full retreat. Every meeting began the same way, with the body cam footage playing silently on a screen no one wanted to look at for too long. Sarah Jenkins, the city's lead attorney, laid it out during the final session. "If this goes to a jury, we lose," she said. "Not maybe. Not possibly. We lose." She pointed to the frozen frame Officer Bring forcing his way past a locked gate. "This isn't a gray area. It's a constitutional violation caught in high definition." The city's initial offer was low procedural, cautious, designed to test whether Marcus would blink. He didn't. David Collins slid a revised demand across the table. $480,000. He said evenly. Public admission of wrongdoing. Officer termination for cause. And mandatory retraining on curtilage and warrantless entry for every sworn officer. The city manager leaned back. Exhaled. And a confidentiality agreement. He added. Marcus shook his head without hesitation. No. He said. Silence is free. Justice costs. That line ended the discussion. 2 days later, the city folded. The settlement was signed. $480. 000 paid to Marcus Thorne. Formal acknowledgement of Fourth Amendment violations, mandatory department-wide training reforms. Officer Kyle Bring terminated for gross misconduct. No appeals. No spin. The union declined to fight the termination. The footage was too clear. No arbitrator would touch it. Kyle Bring cleaned out his locker quietly. No ceremony. No farewell. Just a cardboard box and a career that ended the same way it had escalated without restraint. 6 months later. He still wasn't employed in law enforcement. No department wanted a walking lawsuit. Meanwhile, the city released a carefully worded statement to the press. We regret the actions taken by the officer involved and reaffirm our commitment to constitutional policing. The public response was brutal. You regret getting caught. One comment read, Train your officers. Said another. At the Thorne residence, life slowly returned to normal. The shed door was repaired. The garage reorganized. The gate rehung properly. One evening, Marcus and Elena stood in the backyard as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. The check cleared. Elena said, holding up her phone. Marcus nodded once. Good. He replied. Then it mattered. He looked at the fence line, the invisible boundary that had been crossed so casually and defended so fiercely. The city had paid the price. But the real cost wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in trust and in the warning this case sent to every badge in the department. The backyard was quiet again. But the echo of that Bodycam footage would linger far longer than the sound of breaking wood. 6 months after the settlement, the backyard no longer looked like a crime scene. The shed door had been replaced, stronger than before. The garage was spotless again. The rose bushes had grown back fuller, brighter, almost defiant. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, Marcus stood at the grill once more. Same spot, same patio, same fence line. But everything felt different. Not because the city had paid him, not because an officer had been fired, because the boundary had been restored. Elena stepped out onto the patio with 2 glasses of iced tea and handed one to Marcus. So, she said gently, what do you want to do with the rest? Marcus didn't answer right away. He watched the heat rise from the grill. The faint shimmer in the air, reminding him of that first afternoon, how quickly peace had turned into confrontation. There's a legal defense fund, he said finally. For people on the other side of town, the ones who don't know the words curtilage or exigent circumstances. Reason downers. Elena smiled. She already knew. Send them half. Marcus continued. Cover David's fees. Keep a little for us. The rest, let it help someone who doesn't get cameras and calm neighbors. Elena squeezed his hand. I love you, she said. I love you too. Across the fence. Mrs. Gable waved from her garden. Mr. Henderson nodded from his porch. Life had resumed its rhythm. But the story hadn't been forgotten. At the police department, the training changed. Roll call videos now included a familiar clip, a locked gate, a grill, a calm homeowner saying, "You are trespassing." Recruits were taught a new lesson, one that hadn't been emphasized enough before. A badge does not erase property lines. Marcus didn't attend those trainings. He didn't need to. His lesson had already been delivered in court filings, in headlines, and in the quiet understanding that power unchecked eventually meets a reckoning. As the steaks finished cooking, Marcus closed the grill lid and exhaled. A long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for months. The yard was his again. Not because someone allowed it, but because the law said it always was. The sanctity of a home is one of the oldest promises in American law. Long before body cameras, long before patrol cars, long before badges and radios. The idea was simple: your home is your castle. It is the one place where government power must stop unless it has a very good reason to go further. What happened in Marcus Thorne's backyard wasn't complicated. It wasn't a gray area. It wasn't a split-second mistake in a dangerous situation. It was a choice. A choice to ignore a locked gate. A choice to treat suspicion as permission. A choice to let ego override the Constitution. Marcus knew his rights. He stayed calm. He spoke clearly. And most importantly, there were cameras. That combination saved him. But this story isn't really about Marcus. It's about everyone who doesn't know the legal language. Everyone who freezes when a uniform raises its voice. Everyone who thinks compliance is the only way to survive. How many people have had their privacy violated, their property searched, their lives disrupted, simply because they didn't know where the line was supposed to be? This settlement wasn't just a payout. It wasn't just a headline. It was a warning. To every officer who thinks a badge is a master key, to every department that trains aggression before restraint, to every city that hopes misconduct stays unrecorded. The Fourth Amendment is not optional. It is not situational. And it does not end at the fence line. Marcus didn't win because he was powerful. He won because the law was on his side and the truth was on camera. So here's the question. If an officer walked into your backyard like that, would you know your rights well enough to stand your ground? If this story matters to you, if you believe accountability matters, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Because power only answers to the law when someone is willing to hold it there. Stay safe and know your rights.